throughout the world. People go to extremes. There's amazing ingenuity. And some stuff that's mind-bogglingly dangerous. Some people push the limits because they have to. Others because they choose to. In this episode of the world's most extreme, fast boats.
I'm taking off. This is a classic launch off a runway.
Boats that dive.
You are going places that man never was intended to go.
Boats that fly.
They have the speed of an aircraft, but they're always flying only a few meters away from a solid object.
And unstoppable boats.
Just a little bit of nuclear power can go a very, very long way.
These are the world's 10 most extreme. Half boat, half plane, fully bonkers. This is Sail Rocket, attempting to be the fastest wind-powered vessel afloat. It's 2009 in Walvis Bay in Namibia. Sail Rocket tries to break the world speed record of 51.36 knots, or just over 59 miles an hour. It begins the run with skipper or pilot, Paul Larsen at the helm. But it hits a problem.
All of a sudden, the spray stops and the noise stops. I'm taking off.
The 180-degree flip ended the Sail Rocket Mark I's life and almost took Paul's with it.
I thought when I started that run, I thought I was 15 seconds away from getting our world record. After that crash, another 4.5 years, a whole nother build, another really €500,000 of effort and time and expenditure to get to that point. So it was, it wasn't as close as I thought.
Paul Larsen is from Victoria, Australia, and he's been designing and sailing boats since he was a child.
I wasn't taken to a yacht club and shown what a boat looks like and should be. Dad one day brought up a piece of wood that he'd sharpened a triangular bow into and stuck a margarine lid on the top and let it go, and it blew over to the other side of the dam. And that was fascinating. So then I just started making longer pieces of wood, bigger margarine lids, putting keels on it, chopping and changing.
After years of sailing conventional yachts, Larsen began to develop plans for something different, the fastest sailing boat in the world. He decided to go back to the drawing board with a radical design. To sail fast, you want to minimise the drag of the hull by lifting it out of the water. But as you rise out of the water, you run the risk of taking off. The answer is a hydrofoil under the water's surface. Sail Rocket's shape owes as much to aircraft as boats.
So the Sail Rocket is 50% boat, but 50% plane. It's constructed in such a way that it gets the benefit of both. It has a rigid carbon fibre sail, and that acts almost like the wing of a plane, but it's tilted at 30 degrees so that the air that flows over the wing actually acts like it would on an aircraft, and it gives lift to the vehicle itself.
Sail Rocket 1 was fast, but unstable and unpredictable, as Paul was starting to find out.
The second boat was primarily designed by an aerodynamicist who thought of it more of an aeroplane. We slowly morphed into this shape that became the final boat. We didn't start off looking and saying we think this is what the boat should look like. Everything had to be quantified, and slowly this shape came out. And I mean, there were times we looked at it and thought, you know, this is wacky.
To break the world record, they had to design a vessel that would get through the water equivalent of the sound barrier at around 50 knots. When a boat hits 50 knots, it actually makes the water boil around the propellers or foils. As bubbles form, it slows the vessel down. The team tried different foil shapes, hoping to find something that could help them speed through this 50-knot wall, beating this slowing phenomenon. They were stuck until they made one tweak.
Well, it was the end of the sponsorship, it was the end of the record period, pretty much the end of the season. And the boat was going extremely well. We'd only just unlocked this, this key ingredient that made the boat quickly jump from 50 knots up to 60 knots and beyond.
It was the last sail of the season. They decided to go for the record.
It's now or never, just hope it works, and sheet on, and took off, and the boat just launches down the course. The boat accelerates faster and goes faster than it's ever gone before. It doesn't drop down, and it's not deaccelerating, so I'm thinking the average is fast.
With a speed of 60 knots over 500 metres, Paul and his sail rocket broke the record. And with a top speed of 67, had smashed the 50-knot wall.
That was it. That was the run. That was 11 years' work.
The sail rocket is about pure speed, but some jobs just need muscle. Around the world, oil rigs pump power to the people. But what happens when they've had their day? You can't just pick up several thousand tons of oil platform and pop it into recycling. Or can you? In the North Sea, off the coast of Norway, this is pioneering spirit. With a top speed of 14 knots, just over 16 miles an hour, it may not be fast, but it's strong, steady, and very, very big. The largest construction vessel on the planet.
The mind-boggling thing about this ship is her sheer size. She's just absolutely enormous. When she's ballasted down and fully loaded, she has a displacement of 1 million tons. It's colossal. It's about 10 times bigger than an American Navy aircraft carrier.
And it's here to move an oil platform.
There are hundreds of oil drilling platforms and pumping platforms around the world. They need to be removed at the end of their lives because otherwise they'll just form hazards to navigation. But cutting a platform up at sea is an incredibly dangerous task. So by removing the whole platform in one piece and carrying it ashore, Pioneering Spirit allows that decommissioning work to be done in almost entirely ashore, which is much, much safer for everyone involved.
The platform the ship is here to move belongs to a 13,500-ton oil rig, which never entered service after cracks were found in its legs. With a lifting capacity of 48,000 tons, this should be a walk in the park for Pioneering Spirit, but it is its maiden lift. It begins by ballasting its unique split hull, so it sits deeper in the water. The ship straddles the rig, like a giant ocean-going forklift. Robotic arms are extended to take the weight of the platform. They allow for the ship to rise and fall with the waves, while the rig is still anchored to the seabed.
Pioneering Spirit's stability mostly comes from being enormous. She's just so big that she can weather high waves much better than most smaller ships. But even then, she has an active compensation system. The beams which the platform she's lifting sit on are controlled, so as Pioneering Spirit rises or falls in the water, those beams compensate their position so that the load is held steady.
Once the ship has taken 80% of the weight of the platform, the rig's legs are amputated and the topside is quickly lifted clear. A compressed air system does this in a matter of seconds. Pioneering Spirit is deballasted by pumping water back into the sea, raising the ship and separating the platform from the legs. It's then off to Lutelandet, Norway, where 97% of its materials will be recycled, leaving nothing behind but a handy perch for seagulls. You might think this is a plane from the future, or at least the past's version of the future.
It reminds me of the vehicles they used in Star Wars, the land speeders that floated just above the icy surface of Hoth.
But this is technically a boat. It's registered as a marine craft, but it spends most of its time in the air. And it's powered by a car engine. So what is it? Well, the answer is in Singapore.
The Airfish is basically a boat that can fly. It has wings, and like any aircraft, the pressure above the wing is actually lower than below, and that's what gives lift to any aircraft.
The Airfish can only be operated safely and legally on water, and that makes it a marine vessel. It flies just above the water, exploiting something called the wig effect. Nothing to do with toupees. It stands for wing in ground.
When an airplane starts to fly, when it's close to the ground, it's easier to fly because there's kind of a cushion of air between the wing and the ground.
A plane can fly more efficiently just above land or even water, thanks to increased lift and decreased drag. When a wing flies low enough over a surface, the air between is more tightly squashed, which increases lift. Wings also create drag, caused by vortices, swirling columns of air that slow the craft down. But close to a surface, these vortices can get interrupted, and drag can be reduced. Clever birds like the albatross know all about this science. It conserves energy.
Because of the reduced drag, these ground effect vehicles can be more efficient than planes, and they can also be much faster than boats because they're not having to force their way through the incredibly dense water.
It helps the Airfish hit 80 knots, over 90 miles an hour, using less fuel than a boat, but without the huge cost of a plane. Because it's only a couple of meters from the ground, crashing is less of an issue. If it loses power, it just lands back in the sea. No need for airports or runways. So it's perfect for fast, low-cost travel between islands. It sounds like a perfect transportation solution.
This takes us back to crafts that the Russians built in the 60s that used the same effect. Now, it was a novelty then. They thought it might change the world, but it never really did.
Turns out that wing-in-ground vessels often create as many new problems as they solve.
Moving at these low altitudes at very high speeds can have disadvantages because it makes it very hard to evade obstacles like a ship or a wave coming the other way.
The main difficulty with wing and ground effect vehicles is that they have the speed of an aircraft, but they're always flying only a few meters away from a solid object, which is that's not a position you'd want to be in an aircraft, ideally.
But perhaps the most difficult issue facing Airfish is the wave size it can safely fly over.
Airfish is quite a small wing and ground effect vehicle. She can't operate when the waves are very big. She's limited to, I think, about just over 1 meter wave height, which corresponds to sea state 3. And actually, it's relatively common for the seas to be higher than that. So there's only a certain amount of the time she can operate.
It's why the Airfish could one day ply its trade as a high-speed ferry for harbour crossings, or for island hopping over calm waters. But there's one vessel that's made for rough seas. Off the Pacific coast of the USA, a ship begins to sink. The crew cling on. Help won't be coming. Because sinking is exactly what this ship was built to do. Based off the coast of San Diego, California, this is Flip, a 108-meter-long research platform that turns 90 degrees, so that around 90 meters of its length is underwater.
Like all ships, it's essentially a long tube, but one end of it is not at all intended for any habitation. It's just ballast tanks. So once they get it in location, they start to flood those tanks, and the ship gradually sinks at one end. The other end is full of air and buoyant, and ultimately it becomes a vertical pole in the water.
In the 1960s, Scripps Institution of Oceanography and the Navy wanted to devise a research vessel to study submarine acoustics.
They were trying to see how precisely sound propagated in the ocean. People in submarines would see sound coming from a certain direction, and they would find that the ship that was making the sound wasn't in that direction at all. It was in a different direction. And they realized what was going on underwater was a lot like a mirage, and people wanted to quantify how big that effect was. And so an experiment was designed that used a lot of acoustic receivers, a source, computers, recorders, and other such things.
They couldn't just launch a ship bristling with acoustic receivers. Regular boats bob up and down with the rise and fall of waves, which isn't ideal for acoustic research.
Work from a ship that was rolling on the surface of the ocean was very difficult to make precise measurements down in the interior, given how violent the surface was. And at that time, there were a core of people who had been through World War II in submarines and knew that you could go down beneath the waves and it would be calm. And the trick was to make a platform that accessed that calmness of the interior of the sea.
Flip is designed to heave up and down at a natural period which is longer than the longest swell. Consequently, she barely moves with waves, only 3 inches in a 30-foot sea.
That's a physicist's way of saying it doesn't bob up and down with every wave, so it only rises 3 inches even in a 30-footer. The crew quarters on board Flip need to work in horizontal and vertical positions. Some solutions are ingeniously technical. Some are a little more obvious.
Prior to flipping, there's a whole series of things that have to be done. Anything that is loose like this, not bolted down, the tables and so on, get moved to what you call the lower corner of each compartment. That's a corner that's going to be on the downside when you're in either position.
Walking around the ship is like being in a surrealist painting. Shower drains are on the wall. Steps and railings outside shoot off in multiple directions.
Yeah, well, this is the captain's cabin. The bunks are on tracks and they pivot so that they're running what now would be vertically so that the crew can sleep in them when Flip is in its vertical position.
During the flip, everyone stands out on deck.
Captain will flood the ship slowly down, and you start out holding on for dear life in the waves as the ship rolls, and as it slowly does its flipping, you end up working so that you're sitting like this, enjoying the view, looking out over the water, 15 or 20 meters above the sea, when you started right off, right down pretty much at water level, looking at the waves eyeball to eyeball.
Originally designed for a one-off project more than 50 years ago, today Flip continues to serve scientists who take advantage of its unique perspectives.
The ability to go out to sea and just watch the ocean without having to hang on, and even in very rough weather, is completely unique even today. And that was just a joy. It allowed us to do things that you could not think of doing on a regular ship even today.
But sinking 90 meters is just scratching the surface. 7 miles beneath the waters of the Western Pacific, the Mariana Trench is the deepest known point in the world's oceans. More people have been to the moon. To go this deep, you need a unique vessel. The bathyscaphe Trieste may look like a submarine, but it had no living quarters, and going deep was its only job. Invented by Swiss physicist Auguste Piccard, the Trieste would attempt to carry his son Jacques and oceanographer Lieutenant Don Walsh to the bottom of the ocean. Trieste had 2 distinct sections. The top part is packed with fuel and machinery. And the only bit people went in was here, an incredibly strong sphere made with steel up to 18 centimeters thick.
As you dive deeper underwater, pressure increases dramatically. Every 10 meters of depth that you go down, you add one more atmosphere of pressure. If any part of that pressure sphere had failed, it would have been instantly catastrophic. The pressures that they were under would have meant the inrush of water would have been instantly fatal to both men on board.
The pressure at the bottom of the Mariana Trench is more than 1,000 times the pressure felt at sea level, or the equivalent of having 50 jumbo jets piled on top of your head. Trieste used weights to make it sink and had a brilliant failsafe for releasing the weight if anything went wrong.
They had 16 tons of metal shot in hoppers, which were held in place by magnets, electromagnets. So they could drop shot by turning the magnets off and allowing it to flow out of the hoppers, or if power failed completely, then the electromagnets would release, all the shot would flow out, and then the vehicle would become light enough to float to the surface.
On the 23rd of January 1960, Jacques Picard and Don Walsh descended for almost 5 hours. But at around 9,500 meters, they heard a loud noise. The plexiglass hatch was cracking. They checked their instruments and decided to press on. And at a depth of nearly 11,000 meters, hit the bottom of the Pacific Ocean. Sadly, they didn't see very much apart from a milky cloud of sediment, which failed to clear in the 20 minutes they spent on the ocean floor. Unsurprisingly, no one has gone this deep again. Many who have tried to break the water speed record have been killed in the attempt. In 1967, Donald Campbell died trying to beat his own record, a feat he'd accomplished 6 times before. Dave Warby isn't put off by the odds. He's even built his own boat, a DIY job you don't want to mess up. The current record of 318 miles an hour is held by a pilot who also made his own boat. Literally in his backyard. Dave's dad, Ken. Ken built his boat from scratch.
There's not too many people in the world alive today that can tell you what it's all about, really over 200.
Ken set his record in 1978, 40 years ago. And now Dave is out to beat Dad's record. Nothing like a bit of friendly family rivalry. At the Manning River in Taree, New South Wales, they're preparing for trials of the Spirit of Australia too. The support team includes the boat's designer, Dad Ken. But Dave built the boat himself, by hand.
He has done an amazing job on a shoestring budget. He was there every day on the weekends building this boat. There's not a lot of carbon fibre in this boat. There's a lot of fiberglass, a lot of wood, and a lot of pine.
Inside this monument to DIY is a Rolls-Royce Orpheus jet engine. Previous owner, the Italian Air Force.
We check for cracks, we check for fuel leaks, we check for oil leaks, and we check for corrosion and vibration marks.
Very good. Anything else to worry about?
The other thing with the rudder too is if you hit a stick, or you hit a bird, or you hit a duck, you can pull the back of the transom off at 200 mile an hour.
What would happen then?
We would sink.
Every time we've taken Spirit of Australia out too, and we've had it out about 5 or 6 times now, we've had a problem that we've had to overcome. If I'd put it in the water, the first time we run it and tried to floor it, I'd probably be in hospital or something now. It wouldn't have worked out. It is the same design as Spirit of Australia, but that doesn't mean you take it for granted it's going to do what Spirit of Australia done. It's just a matter of getting enough time on the water to keep running it and solve the problem.
All the while avoiding the #1 obstacle affecting water speed record attempts: death. Thankfully, the team have placed a heavy emphasis on not dying.
If you have any doubts as to the running for whatever reason, and I don't care what it is, stick the red flag up and then try the radio next, okay? The key words on the radio nets are abort, 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 and then we will stop.
We've got to 200 mile an hour and the boat almost becomes unsteerable, which is very dangerous.
Unsteerable? Today's target is 175 miles an hour, which is already in the death zone. Dave gets set for the first run of the day. Where some daredevils have balls of steel, Dave has buns of insight.
You get a feel for a sense of what's right. If it's heavy on the front of the boat or it's light at the back, you can literally feel it through your rear end. So you drive a boat through your arse, and that's where you get the feel for it. That's where you become part of the boat.
This run is all about the centre of gravity of the boat.
Well, our objective today is to test the boat. We've changed a lot of the trim on the boat, so we've put some weights down the back of the boat, and we've also put some aerodynamic modifications to the rear of the cowling of the boat. What we need to do today is to find out if those modifications that we've done to the boat have actually improved its handling.
That looked really good. It's pretty rough out there. He's doing about 130 on the way back. We'll get probably not much more out of that today. We're probably just going to pull it out, refuel it and turn it around and put it back in again. There's not much we can do about the wind.
A late introduction of fuel to the jet engine caused a dip in power.
So it spooled up and it sounded like it was going to slow down again, right? And then once you introduced the fuel, it took off.
Basically, Dave has to hit a button sooner. But that's easily solved.
Okay, Ronnie.
And now that the boat's more stable, there's less anxiety about pushing it harder.
Yes, slightly right of centre to avoid the seagulls.
The possibility of a bird strike is a slight worry, though. ...188 miles an hour.
The team's actually elated. I mean, they're just buzzing. We didn't expect to go beyond 175 miles per hour, and now that we have, it's just fantastic. We're just so elated. It's wonderful.
Step by step, the Spirit of Australia 2 team inched towards Dave's dad's long-held 318 miles an hour record.
It's significant that he offered to pay for lunch, but not the beers tonight.
And now for power output that even Dave can only dream of. The fjords of Norway, untouched natural beauty. Pristine waters, clean, fresh air. Not necessarily. One study put the air quality in the popular Fjord on a par with central London. Norway's idyllic scenery is attracting ever more cruise tourists, with their numbers trebling in the last 15 years. And with tourists comes pollution.
Hundreds of thousands of visitors come into the area each year, and they arrive on ships, and these ships are polluting the atmosphere.
It's not just one cruise ship coming up the fjords, it might be 3 or 4 to go and see the wonderful landscape that these fjords have created, but they're chugging out nitrous oxide with their big diesel engines, and that means that air is getting trapped, the air quality is getting to dangerous levels.
And the area's natural geography adds to the problem.
It's these steep-sided fjord walls that, although very beautiful, actually cause a particular problem. It's very difficult to circulate the air within this structure.
In 2018, the Norwegian Parliament announced it would make its World Heritage Fjords a zero-emission zone by 2026. Ulstein, a Norwegian shipbuilder, is tackling the problem with massive batteries. At a shipyard near Gdansk in Poland, they've been working to reduce emissions, which may also help the fjords. A rechargeable ship. It'll be powered up at port. as long as they've brought the right charging cable with them. The ship will be 160 metres long. It'll have 10 decks and carry 2,000 passengers and more than 500 cars between Fjord in Norway and Stromstad in Sweden. 48 huge lithium batteries will allow the ship to operate at a speed of up to 12 knots for 1 hour per charge.
These ferries run off batteries that are just like the ones in your cell phone, lithium-ion batteries, only 100,000 times larger. It's like you had a ton of phones strapped together. You'd somehow get close to the amount of power stored on these boats.
More higher than me and also wider than me, and it's 48 pieces of them inside the hull, so it's really big.
It's a huge array and will generate 5 megawatt hours. That's about a third more power than an average UK home uses in a whole year. But it's still not enough to power the ship for its entire 2.5-hour crossing. Doing that with current technology would mean filling the cargo space with batteries. The new ship will only be battery powered for the first and last half hour of every crossing. But that's the crucial period, when it's closest to port or the fjords. The hope is that it's only a matter of time before the crossing will be fully electric.
This vessel will be a game changer in the market, and a lot of ship owners and ship designers will follow this technology.
And now for a record nobody wants to break. Aquanauts are an elite group of extreme sea professionals. To qualify as one, trainees need to remain underwater in a pressurized environment for at least 24 hours. But for their work, they'll often stay underwater at pressure for weeks at a time. Because they only decompress once, there's less risk of decompression sickness or the bends. Most aquanauts are highly trained pros, at the top of their game. But on the 26th of May 2013, an untrained ship's cook accidentally joined their number. May 2013, off the coast of Nigeria. A dive team was searching the wreck of the Jascon Fjord tugboat, which had sunk 2.5 days earlier. It lay on the seabed, 30 metres down. The divers had recovered the bodies of 4 of the crew and were working their way through the boat. Helium in their breathing gas alters the pitch of their voices.
What's that?
Then an unbelievable discovery.
Found one, yeah? He's alive, he's alive. He's alive. Okay, keep him there, keep him there. All right, hold on.
Without food, clothes, water, or an air supply, Harrison Akini, the ship's cook, was still alive in an air bubble trapped in the upside-down hull.
So it was really quite remarkable that somebody survived for that length of time at that depth. So typically, recreational divers, if they were going to 30 metres of depth, they'd only spend about 20 minutes down there before they then slowly had to come back up.
Harrison was exceptionally lucky.
This is another of those really fortuitous sets of circumstances. The size of the bubble afterwards was estimated to be about 6 cubic metres of air. Now, a human exhausts about 10 cubic metres of air's worth of oxygen per day. So that's not enough to survive more than half a day. But because he was at 30 metres, that air was pressurised 4 times to what it would normally be. So 6 cubic metres was containing 24 cubic metres worth of oxygen. So actually there was about 2.5 days worth of oxygen in that bubble, just long enough for him to survive as long as he did.
Harrison had air to breathe, just enough. But he also faced another danger, poisoning himself.
One of the things that very quickly happens when people are in confined spaces is, as we breathe out carbon dioxide, the carbon dioxide concentration in the air goes up. As much as 5% carbon dioxide will be fatal to human beings. But because the water was there and he was splashing about in the water, it allowed the carbon dioxide gas that he exhaled to be absorbed into the water. So it meant that it was a less toxic environment for him.
What's wrong with him?
He says it's cold.
What's cold? The water?
The water cold.
Harrison's survival for so long in a deep-sea air bubble was already extraordinary. But there was another killer to overcome: hypothermia.
One of the other things that was vital to his survival was that he managed to assemble a sort of raft from things he found in the cabin, which meant he could be out of the water. And while he was cold in the air, if he'd been in the water, it would have cooled him down so quickly, he'd have lost so much heat that he would have died of hypothermia long before he was rescued.
What is your rank? You're the cook. They always survive.
But they couldn't just take Harrison up to the surface. He was now a saturation diver, an aquanaut.
If he had surfaced at any speed, then the nitrogen bubbling out of his bloodstream around his joints would probably have been fatal.
The divers needed to get Harrison to the diving bell, where he could begin the process of controlled decompression. He could be the first diver to become an aquanaut before completing his first dive.
Okay, Harrison, you mustn't take your hat off, okay? You must just breathe nicely, yeah? Okay. All right, let's go. You hold your umbilical and you listen to me, okay? All right, we're going now. Put your head underwater and breathe comfortably, okay? Okay, how's that? Just take him nice and slowly, okay? Hold your umbilical, Harrison. Don't let go, okay? We're bringing you home. Quickly. Oh, no, he's alive. All right, stick his head in.
Harrison reaches the diving bell, but gets a telling off from his new commanding officer.
How are you feeling, Harrison? All right, very good. You scared me there. All right, you must say Roger when I'm talking to you.
But he takes it on the chin because
you're a survivor.
Get calm. I know it's life and death. The line is already drawn. I thought of my family, thought of my mom, my brothers, my wife.
You put two different people in the same survival scenario, and often one will survive, one will perish. What the survivor has that makes the difference often is a better outlook, a commitment to stay alive. He did what he had to do to keep himself fit, both psychologically and physically, until help came.
catching drug traffickers is like keeping up with the Joneses. If the Joneses were heavily armed and up to no good on the high seas. With radar systems, high-speed boats and even submarines at their disposal, the cartels are continually developing new ways to avoid detection. Law enforcement needs something that can keep up and stay under the radar. Something like a high-speed stealth boat. But where'd you get one of those from? Who knows? It's a secret. Between you and me, rural Ireland might be a good place to start. It may be fairly sleepy on land, but off the coast are some of the world's roughest seas. Although that's no problem for the Thunderchild. This is a prototype of the boat squaring up to Storm Doris, which brought 94-mile-an-hour winds to the British Isles. Now, the designers are taking the latest model on a trip right around the Irish coast, powering around the entire 1,250 miles.
Best of luck, guys. Have a good run, okay?
Thunderchild has a top speed of 54 knots, or 62 miles an hour. Its shape allows it to slice through the water.
Most boats and ships have a fairly broad V-shaped bow, which means when a wave runs into them, it lifts the bow up and the ship pitches up and over it. Wave-piercing bows are much more slender, sharper points. So when a wave reaches them, they pierce the wave and push through it rather than up and over it. And that means that instead of the ship rising over the waves, it gets to go in more or less a straight line. That's important for a small ship in big waves because it means it's not being tossed around as much.
And it's got one more trick up its sleeve. The ability to self-right if it capsizes.
The self-righting feature is really interesting. There aren't many boats which can do that. And there's really two important components to that. She has a very low centre of gravity. Most boats, when they roll over to about 120 degrees or thereabouts, they reach what we call their angle of vanishing stability. And that's the point where if you let them go, they won't return to upright. They'll carry on falling over. But Thunderchild doesn't have an angle of vanishing stability. She's stable all the way up to completely upside down. So you can let her go from any angle of roll and she will snap back to upright. The other half of it is that she has a completely watertight cabin. Most ships have what we call downflooding points, which are things like air intakes for ventilation or for the engines. And if those are big holes in the ship, if they go underwater, the water floods in, the ship will flood, and they probably won't recover.
Stealth designs for ships have been around for decades, though mostly restricted to the military. The aim is to reduce a vessel's radar profile as much as possible. When a radar signal is sent out, the reflections that rebound back can tell the operator how big another ship is. By adding lots of angles to your ship, you can bounce much of the radar signal up into the air or down towards the sea, making the vessel appear much smaller. The materials the vessel is constructed out of also make a huge difference.
Because they are made out of a modern carbon fibre material rather than a steel or aluminium material that most boats might be made out of, it means that they don't deflect radar in the same way. And because of the shape of the boat and the angles of the boat, they're more difficult to detect on radar.
It's not enough to be invisible. You also need to be able to see in the dark. So Thunderchild has night vision infrared cameras, radar, and GPS, meaning it can operate effectively at night. The most dangerous part of their journey round Ireland through the treacherous waters of Rockall was in the dark, but the technology on board meant that Thunderchild barely had to drop its speed. They circumnavigated the entire coastline in just 30 hours. Traffickers around the world might want to watch out, or maybe we just need to hope they don't get one themselves. And now we're going nuclear. Global warming means the Arctic ice is shrinking.
We've noticed, particularly during summer and autumn, when we see the peak minimum of sea ice extent in the Arctic, a drop of 40% over recent decades. And this is leading to parts of the Arctic actually opening up for shipping lanes that normally wouldn't have existed in the past.
But some ships make their own lanes.
Russia has a lot of ports and infrastructure up in the Arctic Circle, which require icebreaker support for ships to get in and out. And also they have some research stations up in the Arctic area, which require an icebreaker to get to at all. So they've led the world in development of large and particularly nuclear-powered icebreakers.
Since the 19th century, the Suez Canal has been the preferred route between Europe and Asia. But the shortest route is actually through the Arctic. If you can get through, it can save 10 days. If you can get through. So just how do these icebreakers power through the ice? Short answer, they don't.
Most icebreakers operate in the same way. They actually break the ice by pushing down on it. The ship rides up and over it, and then it's the weight of the ship pressing down that snaps the ice off.
They are very heavy in terms of their design because they've got these very thick double hulls, so that if they do have a problem where the hull cracks, they're still watertight.
The average nuclear icebreaker weighs well over 30,000 tons, with an outer hull about 5 centimetres thick. But to break through, or rather over the ice, takes a huge amount of power. A diesel-engined icebreaker clearing a path through 3-metre thick ice could use more than 100 tons of fuel per day.
What a nuclear-powered ship can do that a typical ship cannot do is stay afloat, or in the case of submarines, stay submerged for very, very long periods of time without having to refuel. I mean, just a little bit of nuclear power can go a very, very long way. That allows them, especially when you're in these desolate environments like the Arctic tundra, to survive for long periods of time without having to travel back.
These ships can stay at sea for months on end, docking mainly just to restock food supplies. With 2 nuclear reactors on board, they can travel for up to 5 years without refueling. With Russia the only country currently operating nuclear icebreakers, it looks like this Cold War is rather one-sided.